everyone. Welcome to week 3 of How to Be Great at Intuitive Eating in Midlife. And I'm just going to get the Instagram folks set up and get them started here. So if we haven't met before, we're going to do a little bit of review first. And as we get everybody together here and get everybody coming online, I apologize, we're a little bit behind today because technology decided to break. So those of you that have been doing technology for the last couple of years, thanks to the pandemic, you get how technology just breaks sometimes. So looks like Instagram is running a little bit slow, getting us connected to a few folks, but let's go ahead and get started and those folks can catch the replay. So if we haven't met already over the last couple of weeks, I'm Amanda Bullat. I'm a registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and a strong advocate for helping women in midlife savor food and their body by undieting their relationship with food and body. And as a former athlete with a disordered relationship with food and a woman in my 40s, I live for helping women in midlife undiet their lives through intuitive eating, mindfulness, and wellness without obsession. So that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to do this series for you in January, in particular, National Dieting Month, and so that you can get some skills, some background on how intuitive eating can really help you kind of overcome all of the diet messaging that's going on right now. And I will say, I've got kind of a piecemeal technology going on here today. I have a camera in one place and I have my phone camera in another place. So for those of you on Instagram, if you find me looking down at the notes on the page, my apologies, I am not ignoring you. And for those of you on YouTube and Facebook, if you see me looking up, I'm saying hi to the Instagram folks. So bear with me as we get everybody involved here. So over the next handful of weeks, we've been doing this for a couple weeks already. I've been sharing a variety of resources with you, especially if you're a woman in midlife, to help you undiet your life, maybe set some undiet resolutions or intentions for this year. And some of those resources have included some Savor Food and Body podcast episodes, including the one last week with Dr. Michelle May. She is the founder and creator of Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat, and Am I Hungry? And so you can go and check out that episode on the Savor Food and Body podcast. And also, we've been doing weekly office hours, so just free drop-in office hours, and you can get a link to join those office hours. We'll be doing that again this Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and there'll be a link right below where you're watching this video to join, get that invitation for the office hours. So it's a great way to low stakes, just come and ask questions about intuitive eating, get to know each other a little bit more, and maybe meet some other fellow folks that are trying to undiet their lives in the new year and kind of just want some support. Diet culture is really loud right now. And so dropping in for those office hours on Friday mornings can be a really great way to get some additional support. So again, there will be a link for the office hours down below wherever you're watching this video, and I hope to see you on Friday morning. So let's dive into today's topic. And if you've missed the other two parts of this series, each week I've been going through a couple of the intuitive eating principles as I typically teach them to my clients and my students. Of course, intuitive eating in and of itself and the 10 principles were created by Evelyn, Tribole and Elyse Resch back in the 1990s. So it's been around a while and it's been validated by a lot of scientific evidence. So it's a really great tool to use to help you heal your relationship with food. So far we've talked about how to reject the diet mentality and make peace with all foods. And last week I shared how to identify your food policing thoughts and how focusing on satisfaction with food can actually help keep those thoughts at bay. Your brain can't do two things at once very well, have your critical voice like running the show and have you focusing on enjoying your food at the same time. So there's a lot of nuance to that, of course. So if you listen to that episode from last week and you've got lots of questions, your mind's exploding, again, come to the office hours on Friday. And I'd love to help you understand that a little bit more or apply it to your lived experience, which is also really important. So today we're going to dive into what I call the hunger fullness spectrum. You might also hear this talked about as the hunger fullness scale. That's how it's mentioned in the intuitive eating book and in the workbook. But I like this idea of a spectrum because it having a scale kind of like scale's a loaded word, right? We've got scales for our bodies and scales for our food and all of that. And I just like to stay away from that word. So the idea of a spectrum too is that you could fall anywhere on this spectrum in terms of, are you hungry? Are you full? Are you somewhere in between? Are you hungry enough for a meal? Are you hungry enough just for a snack? Maybe you're not hungry at all, but something just really would taste really good. And so you want to enjoy that. So that's why I like this, thinking about this in terms of a spectrum as we go through this. We're also going to talk about why it can be hard to hear subtle signs of hunger and how satisfaction plays a really critical role in helping you find comfortable fullness. So if you're like many of my clients and students, is they know what ravenous hunger feels like, and they know what really uncomfortable fullness feels like. And it can be hard to kind of find that sweet spot in the middle. And there's a lot of importance to finding kind of your sweet spot in the middle. But there's also, and this is really, really important, it's also really important to understand that your body, your hunger, your fullness needs, they are going to flow throughout this spectrum as you go throughout your days, go throughout your weeks, go throughout your season. If you're experiencing symptoms of perimenopause in midlife, and even just your cycles in general, your hunger and fullness is going to change throughout that. So it's really important as we talk about this spectrum here that you don't get hung up on like, oh, I've got to be at this place on the spectrum before I can eat, or I shouldn't eat because I'm at this point on the fullness side. That's really diet mentality. So we're going to talk about how to avoid that. So let's just explain, first of all, what is this hunger fullness spectrum? So I do tend to use with folks, have them draw out on a piece of paper, like draw out the spectrum and, tick off the numbers. I like to use numbers not in a hierarchical way. Let me be really clear about that, but more in just a visual way so that we can visualize this spectrum. You've got 0 on one end of the spectrum and 10 on the other end of the spectrum. And again, those numbers do not mean anything other than like showing you where you are on the spectrum. I also invite clients to come up with their own language about where they are in the spectrum and how they identify hunger in their body, how they identify fullness in their body. So I'm going to share with you how I would describe that spectrum and the different stages on the spectrum. But and feel free, please, to write it down in a journal, scrap piece of paper as we're going through this. That can be really helpful for you to reflect back on later. And also, when you reflect back on it later, I want to invite you to rewrite the definition of each one of the stages using the words that make sense to you and how you experience hunger and fullness in your body. So from 0 to 5, that end of the spectrum, we consider that the hunger side of the spectrum. And 5 to 10, or the right hand side of the spectrum, we consider that the fullness side. So anywhere from like the 0 to 2 side of things, that could be considered ravenous or primal hunger. So that's where a lot of people might describe it as really growling stomach, hangry. Hangry is a big one for sure. Most people know what hangry feels like. And that's definitely happening in that 0 to 2 range on the spectrum. Then as we move on up to 3 and 4, we might experience that as I'm starting to notice that I'm getting hungry. I'm getting a little distracted from my task at hand that I've been doing. I'm starting to think more about food, and maybe some subtle physical symptoms too, maybe some a light stomach growling, or maybe a little headachy. Those those signals I find in most people get louder as they get into around that 2-ish range. But when you're in that 3 to 4, you can still feel some of those subtle signs of physical hunger as well. And that's again where we see some more of the psychological part, where I'm thinking about, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? What am I going to have for lunch? Oh, this snack sounds really good. And our mind and attention is starting to drift away from the email that we're writing, the project we're working on, whatever it is, and we're starting to think more about food. It might be where we start distracted scrolling through Pinterest or social media looking for a cool recipe or something like that. That could be a sign of subtle hunger that you're experiencing. And what I want to say too that's really important about hunger is the diet mentality and diet culture has conditioned us to wait until we're in that primal ravenous space of hunger before we're allowed to start eating. And that's complete BS. If you are interested in eating and it's been a while since you have eaten, even if you're not feeling those louder physical symptoms, it's time to eat. So most bodies, again, please don't get hung up on these numbers, but most bodies like to eat in that 3-ish hour range, like have something in their tank. So it's just like saying, like most cars, like once you get below a quarter of a tank of gas left, like they need to go to the gas station. It's somewhat similar to that. So again, that is not a super direct science. Everybody is different. And that's why learning how your body fits on this spectrum, how to listen to these cues, how to practice intuitive eating is so helpful, because you don't have to rely on anybody else's rules on when you can eat and when you can't eat. So that's my soapbox for how diet culture can hijack you being able to feel your hunger cues. Other things that come in to contribute to not feeling your hunger cues very well are, of course, trauma. If you are in traumatic situations, you've had recent trauma experiences, how that is affecting your nervous system is definitely going to affect whether you can tap into more of that rest and digest side of your um, nervous system and tune into those subtle signs of hunger. So give yourself a lot of grace with that. And hopefully you're also getting some support with processing that trauma. And of course, stress too, just our everyday stress. Now I see this go both ways with folks, in that if we're pretty stressed out about something, we might be eating to support that stress, like a distracted eat type eating or boredom type eating or something like that, like just to have that sensory satisfaction in our mouth because it's the rest of life is too hard. I've also seen it go the other way too, where if someone's super stressed, they're just not interested in eating at all. Like nothing sounds good. They just don't have the time for food. They just can't deal. So wherever you fall into that, know that if you're in a place where you're like, I just don't know what subtle hunger feels like, it's totally okay. There can be a lot of these other factors going on that are keeping you from being in touch with your body in that intimate way and trusting it too. So remember from our last conversations, like diet culture and the food police do a really great job of hijacking you listening to your body and you trusting your body. So know that that is not your fault. There's a lot of messaging and a lot of conditioning that comes with that. Okay, so let's talk about the middle part of the spectrum, and that's like around this 5-ish space. So that's where we're not really hungry, we're not really full, we're not really even thinking about food. We're just going on about our day, and it's just not even a factor. Now, if you have spent a fair amount of time or decades dieting and being preoccupied with food, that might sound crazy to you, like, when am I ever not thinking about food? I'm thinking about what I have to prepare and what I have to shop for and what I'm allowed to eat or not allowed to eat. But as you move into practicing intuitive eating from a physiological place, your body will get to a point where when you don't need food, you're not really thinking about food. I know it sounds crazy, but I see it happen all of the time as people work on this and do this practice. Again, another great discussion to bring to office hours on Friday. So now let's talk about the fullness side of the spectrum. So anywhere from like 6, if you're in that 6-ish range, you might be like, yeah, there's food in my belly, but I could eat more. Still interested in the food. As we move into 7, you could start feeling so like, yeah, there's definitely, I'm no longer hungry. I can definitely feel the food in my stomach. And I'm noticing that I'm getting a little disinterested in what I'm eating. Now, that's not to say that you might not still be interested in maybe some dessert or a different flavor, something to kind of cap off your eating experience. A lot of my clients will go back and forth between this. I'm having something salty, I need to have something sweet. I'm having something salty, now I have something sweet. Or that could happen with, any flavors too. Your mouth is trying to balance out the whole eating experience. So that can all be happening around this 7. Sometimes around this 7-ish into 8-ish space is where we talk about, like, for most people, that's kind of comfortable fullness. We're going to talk about how satisfaction relates to this too, but from a physiological standpoint, when someone's kind of around that 7 space, again, we're losing interest in the food. We're no longer feeling any signs of physical hunger in our body, and we're ready to move on to the next part of our day or evening or whatever it is. We're ready to release our eating experience and move on. When we get into the 8, or even I would say it's probably more accurate for the people I've worked with, that 9 to 10-ish space. That's where we're starting to get a little bit uncomfortable in terms of how full we are. So that's why I like to think about, there's comfortable fullness and there's uncomfortable fullness. Again, we're not here to judge that, oh, comfortable fullness is good and uncomfortable fullness is bad. That's not the point of this. It's the point is to learn how these sensations feel in your body, and also recognize that it is a moving target. How full or how hungry you get in your day is going to be reflective of your activity level, like I mentioned, your stress levels, your sleep. So there's another one for women in midlife. If our sleep is hijacked, our hunger and fullness cues are going to be all over the place. So again, there needs to be a lot of compassion, a lot of compassionate curiosity, as I say, as you're learning to experience both sides of the spectrum. So when someone is in this uncomfortable place of fullness, that's where we think about, say, the classic Thanksgiving fullness, or I need to find my comfy pants. I'm ready to take a nap. I'm not thinking about, excuse me, I'm not thinking about, oh, I'm ready to go do this next project. Like, it's nap time. We also might too, as someone approaches that uncomfortable fullness, say in the 10-ish range, what I find with a lot of folks, and I definitely did this myself too, is we get into bargaining of like, oh, I'm never going to eat that food again, or oh, I can't be trusted with that food. See, I went and I ate too much of it. And also, we can start bargaining of like, how am I going to make up for this eating experience tomorrow? So we might be starting to think like, oh, I'm going to jump on such and such diet. Like, this worked for me last time. Let's try that. I'm going to throw out the food that made me feel so full. All of that. So 10 starts to really amp up the food police thoughts and the critical voice for sure. And that's why we start bargaining of, how am I going to get back on track tomorrow, because this really sucks and how I feel in my body right now. So now let's talk about how the primal hunger, ravenous hunger, and fullness, the uncomfortable fullness, relate to each other. Because there are many, many times where, as I'm teaching this to a client, and they say like, "Oh yeah, I absolutely know what ravenous hunger feels like, and I absolutely know what uncomfortable fullness feels like." If we arrive into a meal, we haven't eaten for a long period of time, no matter what the reasoning behind that is, that doesn't really matter, and we're in that real primal stage of hunger, our body is kicked into survival mode. It says, you need to feed me right now, or this game is done. So that's where we start. Like, we're not really caring about what we eat. We just need to like get the job done. It's open the fridge, open the pantry, open season feeding. And we're not gonna necessarily take the time to go, is this satisfying? Do I like the spices? Do I like the texture? No, it's get the job done, get as many calories into my body as possible so that I can stop feeling this pain, this hangriness, this headaches, this stomach growling. Like, I don't want to feel this discomfort anymore. And I need fuel. It's like the car on the side of the road that is not going to go anywhere until you put some gas in it. So there's no time for any like mindful eating, exploring satisfaction when you've been in this primal hunger space. So it's also then really easy because of that to swing way over to the uncomfortable fullness because there's no stops in between. We're not pausing, we're not reflecting, we're just getting the food in, and then all of a sudden we get to a point where like, oof, that was a lot. Now I'm uncomfortably full. Again, we're not here to judge that experience, and if that has been your experience somewhat regularly, and maybe that's coming because you've done a lot of diets, you've followed a lot of rules, and you've been detached from your hunger and fullness signals and your body trust with those. That's okay. That's why you're here. That's why you're exploring intuitive eating, because you want to do something different. So if that has been your experience, to swing from one end of the spectrum very quickly over to the other end of the spectrum, and that's what normal eating is to you, but you're tired of feeling uncomfortable on both ends of that spectrum, know that you're definitely not alone in that. And it's kind of part of the course of being in part of diet culture, and being influenced by diet culture. So let's talk about how satisfaction and subtle hunger can help you then feel more of that comfortable fullness. So again, if we start eating more when we're in that 3-ish, 4-ish range, meaning I'm just thinking about food, I'm getting kind of excited about like, oh yeah, I've got this leftovers for lunch or whatever, and I'm looking forward to that. That means I'm kind of getting subtly hungry. Maybe I've got some, for me personally, some low rumbles in my stomach, and it's time to like go find the snack. That's definitely the 3-ish space. But even in the 4, if I'm interested in having a snack, I'm kind of getting excited about like, yeah, I really like these foods. Oh, that would be a cool combination. Again, I'm thinking about the food. And so if we go and we start eating when we're in that space of the spectrum, we're more likely to choose what we want to eat from more of a discerning point. Like I said, oh, this combination with this combination would be really good. Like we're putting some thought into that, not thought based on how many calories does this have or this would be healthier. Like, no, that's food policing. But when you're in that 3 to 4 space of the spectrum, you have the capacity to notice, oh, hey, I'd really like to go eat these foods. Oh, but this critical voice, this food policing voice, I can hear it. Versus when we get to that primal space, like we're not listening to any other commentary. We just need to eat. So it's important to kind of recognize how that food policing mentality can kind of come in to when you're in that subtle signs of hunger, which is okay because that's how then you can practice finding satisfaction and talking back to that food police, that critical voice. So this is how these individual practices of intuitive eating all kind of start wrapping together. So if someone starts eating around that 3 to 4-ish, they're choosing their food and they're noticing, yeah, I'd really like something warm. I'd really like something spicy, but a little tangy too. I'd like something kind of maybe smoothish and creamy, but I want something crunchy too. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, that might be a bowl of like stir fry with some rice and some chicken or tofu and like a creamy peanut sauce over the top of it. So we've got warm, we've got smooth and creamy, we've got crunchy with the vegetables. That's just an example, some crunchy peanuts on top, whatever. So, as if you start eating when you're in more of that subtle hunger, you can experience then some mindful eating. Like your body's not starving. So, you can actually sit down and enjoy your food, enjoy those subtle cues that are coming in of like, oh, I like this flavor, I like this texture. And then as you have that experience and you move into the fullness side of the spectrum, you start to notice, yeah, okay, I can feel that I'm no longer hungry. I've got food in my belly, so that's at around that 6-ish. And you can start to notice as you approach that 7 going, okay, I'm kind of getting tired of the creamy, spicy chicken, tofu, stir fry, peanut sauce here. I'm ready for something maybe a little cooler, a little wet, a little sweet. So maybe now I'm going to have a piece of fruit and some dark chocolate on the side or something like that. Or I'm going to have something crunchy and sweet. I'm going to have a cookie that goes with it, a ginger snap cookie, maybe with this stir fry experience. Whatever that is for you, it doesn't really matter. But as you've been able to have this more mindful eating experience in that, say, 3 to 7-ish range on the spectrum, you can make those discerning choices about your food based on what's going to sound most satisfying to you. And again, we're leading with satisfaction. We're not thinking about calories. We're not thinking about whether it's healthy or not. We're purely staying in the moment of what would be satisfying right now. I also want to, again, that disclaimer, like I mentioned before with satisfaction, it's not reasonable to think that every eating experience is going to be like, ooh, stay in the middle of this spectrum and make sure that you're always satisfied. Like sometimes we do just need to get the job done. Our lives are busy. So don't get hung up on it. Like if I haven't found satisfaction at every meal today, this week, whatever. If there are a few meals a week where you can sit down and practice this more mindful eating, practice satisfaction, finding satisfaction with your food, then that's already going to set that practice, that skill that's going to start solidifying it in your body. It's going to start solidifying that you can trust your body with these hunger, fullness, and satisfaction cues. So please do not think that this has to be a 24/7 practice. Again, it's a practice, it's not perfection. And why it's also really important to say that it's a practice, not perfection, is because hunger and fullness and satisfaction are moving targets. Again, they relate to stress. They relate to how much exercise you did during the day. What are you doing at work? Do you have a lot of like heady, like little cognitive work that you're doing? You're gonna burn up some fuel. You need to feed your brain. So and again, where you might be in your cycles, if you might be experiencing perimenopause symptoms, all of that is going to affect where you fall on this spectrum at any given time and how what's going to seem satisfying to you too. So the point of getting to know hunger and fullness and satisfaction in this way is so you can learn to shut up and listen to yourself. So, and it's listening to yourself, it's not listening to the commentary from the diet culture influenced food police, which we talked about in episode 2. So I know that was a lot. This was probably the longest talk that we're going to have in this series. And there's a lot of nuances to it too. So again, look at the link down below and join the office hours on Friday if you can make it. There will also be a recording of this talk today on the YouTube channel for Savor Food and Body, and it will also be posted on the Savor Food and Body podcast if you'd rather just listen to the audio. So again, thanks everyone for being here today. I see some friends popped in on Instagram. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I will catch you guys next time. Take care.